The thing you gotta understand about silence is that it ain't really silent. Not ever. Not even in the dead of an Indiana winter, when the snow falls so thick it's like a blanket smothering the whole world. You got the groan of the old farmhouse timbers, the tick-tick-ticking of the radiators fighting a losing war against the cold, the faint, papery rustle of the insulation in the walls. That's the soundtrack of my life, or it was. Right up until the night the other sound started, the one that didn't belong. It began on a Tuesday, I think. The days bled together out there on the outskirts of Terre Haute, a flat gray expanse of frozen fields and skeletal corn stalks. My world had shrunk to the four walls of my grandparents' house after Nana passed. She left it to me, this big, drafty relic full of mothballs and memories, and I'd crawled into it like a wounded animal, licking my wounds from a life in the city that had gone sideways in a big, loud and expensive way. My name's Leo, by the way. Just a guy in his late 20s who thought he was running from something. Turns out I was running to it. So, Tuesday, the wind was howling like a banshee, whipping snow against the window panes in sharp, gritty bursts. I was on the couch, a threadbare Afghan pulled up to my chin, watching the fire in the hearth dance and spit. That's when I heard it under the wind, a sound that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. Scratch, scratch, scritch, scratch. It was coming from the wall behind the couch, not the random settling of an old house. This was deliberate, the slow, patient drag of something hard and sharp against the interior of the wall, right behind my head. I froze, my beer halfway to my lips, and just listened. My heart was a jackhammer in my chest. Scratch, pause, scratch. It went on for a full minute, maybe two. Then it stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, my shoulders slumping. A branch on the roof, maybe. A loose piece of siding. I was jumpy, that's all. Spooked by the isolation and the quiet. I told myself that, repeated it like a mantra until I almost believed it. The next night, it came back. But this time, it was different. It wasn't behind the couch. It was in the wall of my bedroom right next to the headboard, and it wasn't a scratch. It was a tap. A soft, polite, almost hesitant tap, 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 like someone was gently rapping a knuckle on the other side of the drywall. 3 inches from my ear, I shot upright in bed, my blood running cold. "Hello?" I whispered, the word sounding stupid and small in the dark. Silence. Then, tap, 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 tap. A little faster this time, a little more insistent. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so bad I could barely swipe the flashlight on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the faded floral wallpaper. I pressed my ear against the wall. Nothing, just the hum of absolute nothing. I must have sat there for an hour, listening, my ear going numb from the pressure. Just as I was about to pull away, convinced I was having a stress-induced auditory hallucination, I heard it. Not a tap, a voice, so faint it was like a thought that wasn't my own, filtered through layers of plaster and wood and time. "It's lonely in here." I recoiled from the wall so fast I nearly fell out of bed. My heart wasn't just hammering now. It was trying to batter its way out of my ribcage. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded my system. I didn't sleep a wink. I spent the rest of the night on the couch with every light in the house blazing, a kitchen knife on the coffee table beside me. The following morning, in the pale, cowardly light of day, I tried to rationalize it. The wind, the pipes, a dream. I was so desperate for a normal explanation that I almost convinced myself, but then I'd remember the texture of that voice. It wasn't old or young, male or female. It was dry. It was the sound of dead leaves skittering across pavement. It was the sound of dust. I called my buddy Dave back in Indianapolis. "Dude, you're not gonna believe this," I started, trying to sound casual. He cut me off. "Leo, man, you sound like hell. You still out there in the boonies? You're gonna lose your marbles, bro. It's too quiet." "This isn't about quiet, Dave. It's the house. It's making noises. Old houses do that, man. They settle. They groan. It's what they do." "This isn't settling," I said, my voice dropping. It talked to me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the city traffic in the background, a sound I suddenly missed with a physical ache. "It talked to you," Dave repeated, his tone flat. "Like the walls told you a secret?" "Forget it," I muttered. "I shouldn't have called." "Look, Leo," Dave said, his voice softening a fraction. "You've been through it. The whole Sarah thing, losing your job, Your head's all messed up. Maybe you should come back to the city for a few days. Crash on my couch." He was right, of course. My head was all messed up, but I knew with a certainty that felt like a stone in my gut that what I'd heard was real. I couldn't go back to the city. Not yet, I had to know. That night I didn't go to my bedroom. I sat in the living room in the dark, the fire reduced to embers, and I waited. The old grandfather clock in the hall ticked away the seconds, each one a tiny hammer blow on my nerves. Midnight came and went. 1 a.m., 2. My eyelids were getting heavy. The fear slowly being eroded by exhaustion. Maybe it was a one-time thing. Maybe I'd scared it off. Then, from the kitchen, a new sound. Not a scratch or a tap, a sizzle. I crept off the couch and peered around the door frame. The stovetop was on. One of the electric burners was glowing a dull cherry red. There was nothing on it. It was just on. I walked over, my socked feet silent on the linoleum, and reached for the dial. It was turned all the way to high. I never used this stove. Nana had been a microwave and crockpot lady for the last 10 years of her life. I twisted the dial to off. The red glow faded. I stood there in the dark kitchen, the only light coming from the moon reflecting off the snow outside. The house was dead quiet again. Too quiet. I realized the familiar sounds, the ticking radiator. The groaning timbers had all stopped. It was a vacuum, a perfect absolute silence. And then the voice came again. Not from a wall this time. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, hanging in the still air of the kitchen like a bad smell. "You don't use the good rooms." I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking. No answer, just that oppressive, waiting silence. Then from down the hall, a door creaked open, slowly. I'd closed all of them. I always did. I inched my way down the dark hallway, my back pressed against the wall. It was the door to the formal dining room, a room nobody had used in 20 years. The door was standing wide open. The room inside was pitch black. I flipped the light switch. Nothing. The bulb was dead or the power was out. I shone my phone's flashlight into the room. The beam danced over the heavy oak table, the high-backed chairs shrouded in white sheets like a gathering of ghosts. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. Everything except for one chair at the head of the table. The sheet was gone from it, and the wooden surface of the chair seat was clean, as if someone had just been sitting there. On the table in front of the chair was a single, dusty photo album I'd never seen before. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely pick it up. The cover was made of a cheap faux leather material cracked with age. I opened it. The first page held a black and white photo of my grandfather, a man I'd never met. He'd died young, long before I was born. He was standing stiffly in front of this very house, a grim look on his face. Nana never talked about him much. She'd just get a tight, pinched look around her mouth and change the subject. I turned the page. More photos of him. Him with a shovel. Him painting the shutters. Him looking tired and grim. Then I reached a page that made my blood run cold. It was a photo of my grandfather. Much older, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken into deep, dark sockets. He was sitting in the very chair whose sheet was now missing, and he was staring directly at the camera with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. Behind him, the wallpaper seemed wrong, blurred, as if something was standing just behind him, something the camera couldn't quite capture, its long, pale fingers resting on his shoulders. I dropped the album. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, sending up a cloud of dust that made me cough. I backed out of the room, my phone's light jerking wildly across the walls. I didn't stop until I was back in the living room, my chest heaving. This was no ghost. This was something else. Something that lived in the bones of the house, in the spaces between the walls, something that had been here a long, long time. The next few days were a special kind of hell. The sounds became more frequent, more aggressive. The scratching wasn't just in one wall. It was a chorus, moving through the house like a swarm of invisible insects. The taps became hard, percussive thumps that made the pictures on the walls rattle. The voice became clearer. "Stay with us, Leo. We get so lonely. Your grandfather stayed. He was good to us. For a while, I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I looked like a wild man, my eyes wide and red-rimmed, my hands constantly shaking. I called a local handyman, a grizzled old guy named Earl who showed up in a rusted-out pickup truck. I told him I thought I had an animal in the walls. He poked around the crawl space and the attic for about 20 minutes before coming back inside, dusting off his overalls. His folksy demeanor was gone, replaced by a wary tension. "Ain't no animal, son," he said, his voice low. "No droppings, no nests, no entry points." He looked around the living room, his eyes lingering on the walls. "This your family's place?" "Yeah, my grandmother's." He nodded slowly, a grim look on his face. "My pappy used to tell stories about this land. Said the folks who built out here, they built on something that was already here. Didn't have a name for it. Just said it was a hollower, something that feeds on quiet and loneliness. Gets into the wood, the plaster, makes a home for itself." He looked me dead in the eye. "It don't mean you harm, not exactly. It just wants company. Permanent-like." He left without charging me, refusing a cup of coffee. I stood at the window and watched his truck disappear down the long, snowy lane, and I felt the most profound isolation of my life. I was alone out here, truly alone. That night it made its move. I was dozing fitfully on the couch when I was jolted, awake by a sound that was unmistakably the front door lock turning. Click, clack. I sat up, my heart in my throat. The door didn't open, but a moment later I heard the same sound from the back door. Click, clack. Then, one by one, I heard the distinct, sickening sound of every window in the house locking itself. From the inside, I was trapped. Panic seized me. I ran to the front door, yanking on the handle. It didn't budge. I threw my shoulder against it. Nothing. It was sealed shut, as if it had been nailed closed. I scrambled to a window, fumbling with the latch. It wouldn't move. It was frozen in the locked position. I picked up a heavy ashtray and swung it at the glass. It bounced off with a dull thwack, not leaving so much as a scratch. "No need for that, Leo." The voice was right behind me. I whirled around. The hallway was empty. "We just want to talk." The voice came from the kitchen. I backed away from the window, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "What do you want?" I screamed, my voice echoing in the dead air. "The same thing your grandfather wanted. Peace and quiet. A place to belong." A door slammed upstairs. Then another. I heard heavy, dragging footsteps moving across the ceiling, directly above my head. Something was walking around in my bedroom. "He fought it at first, too," the voice continued, now seeming to emanate from the heating vent near the floor. But in the end, he saw the beauty of it, of becoming part of the whole, of never being lonely again. The photo, the terror in my grandfather's eyes. He hadn't accepted anything. He'd been consumed. I had a sudden, chilling thought. The fireplace, the flue, it was the only way out that wasn't a door or a window. I stumbled toward the hearth, the fire long dead, leaving behind a pile of cold ash and soot. I looked up into the dark, brick-lined chimney. It was a tight fit, but maybe. I was about to try and hoist myself up when the voice spoke again. And this time it wasn't a dry whisper. It was a chorus. A dozen, 100 overlapping voices. Men, women, children, all speaking in unison. Their voices layered into a single, monstrous sound that vibrated in my very bones. There is no outside. The living room wall, the one with the big picture window, began to change. The wallpaper, the same faded floral pattern I'd known since childhood, began to bubble and blister. The plaster beneath it swelled and contorted, pushing outward, forming shapes. I watched, paralyzed with a horror so complete it felt like dying, as faces began to emerge from the wall. They were grotesque, half-formed impressions, their features blurred and stretched, their mouths open in silent screams. I saw my grandfather's face, his eyes pleading. I saw others I didn't recognize. A woman with long, flowing hair made of plaster, a child with a sunken, distorted cheek. They were all trapped there, fused into the very structure of the house. The house wasn't haunted. The house was the ghost. And it was hungry for another soul to add to its collection. The wall started to reach for me. Long, tendril-like extensions of plaster and lath snaked out across the floor, cracking the floorboards as they came. They weren't fast, but they were inexorable. A cold, dry smell filled the air, the smell of old attics and forgotten graves. I backed into the corner, my mind screaming, my body numb. There was nowhere to run. The tendrils of the house wrapped around my ankles, cold and rough as stone. They began to pull, dragging me slowly, relentlessly, toward the wall of screaming faces. "Join us, Leo," the chorus whispered. A sound like a desert wind through 1,000 dead trees. Be still. Be quiet. Be home. I fought, God, I fought. I kicked and thrashed, but it was like fighting against quicksand. The tendrils crept up my legs, my waist, tightening their grip. I could feel a profound coldness seeping into my bones, a lethargy spreading through my mind. The urge to just stop, to give in, to let the silence take me was overwhelming. My hand brushed against something in my pocket. My phone. With the last shred of my will, I fumbled it out. No service. Of course, there was no service. But the voice memo app, I stabbed at the icon and hit record. I don't know why I did it. A final message in a bottle. A proof that I was here. That this happened. I held the phone close to my mouth as the plaster crept over my chest, making it hard to breathe. My name is Leo Matheson, I gasped, my voice thin and reedy. I'm at my grandmother's house. 1473 County Road, 500 West. It's in the house. It's the house! It takes you. It makes you a part of it. It's not a ghost. It's a hollower. It feeds on the quiet. On the lonely. Don't let yourself be alone. Don't let yourself be quiet. The plaster was at my neck now. I could feel its dry, powdery texture against my skin. I saw my grandfather's face in the wall, inches from my own, his mouth a perfect O of agony. Please, I whispered into the phone, my final word. Someone find this. Remember me. The plaster closed over my face. It wasn't darkness. That's the last thing people would expect. It was emerging, a slow dissolving of the self. My thoughts became sluggish, then they weren't my thoughts anymore. They were the house's thoughts. The creak of the floorboards, the sigh of the wind in the eaves, the patient, endless waiting. I could feel the others in here with me. Their consciousnesses like faint, fading embers in a vast, silent darkness. My grandfather was here. I could feel his enduring terror, a cold, sharp shard in the numb hole. And I could feel the others, the ones from before, their identities worn smooth as river stones by time. The hollower was content. It had another voice for its silent chorus, another set of memories to digest, another piece of its eternal quiet kingdom. The phone sat on the floor for 3 days, its battery slowly dying. Then a state trooper, doing a welfare check after a call from a concerned friend named Dave, kicked in the front door. He found the house empty but spotlessly clean. No dust, no signs of a struggle. The air was still and cold. On the floor in the living room, next to a perfectly clean fireplace, was a phone. The trooper picked it up. The screen was cracked, but it still had a sliver of battery life. He saw the voice memo app was open. He pressed play. He listened to the frantic, gasping message. The fear in the young man's voice was palpable, a stark contrast to the absolute, unnerving peace of the house around him. The trooper shook his head, a sad, grim look on his face. Another one. Lost to the isolation. Probably wandered out into the snow. A tragedy. He marked the case as a missing person, his rational mind rejecting the wild story on the recording. Stress, psychosis. It happened. As he was leaving, he paused at the front door, feeling a sudden, inexplicable chill. He could have sworn he heard something. A faint, dry sound like a whisper coming from the wall beside him. He turned and looked. It was just a wall with faded floral wallpaper. He shook his head, dismissing it as the wind. He never noticed that the front door locked itself behind him with a soft, final click as he walked away. And he certainly didn't hear the new, faint voice that now joined the silent chorus within the walls. A voice that was still learning to be still, learning to be quiet, learning to be home. It was my voice. And I am here. We are all here. And we are so lonely. Won't you stay a while?